The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Ashford Hall like a burial shroud. Inside the great hall, Margot Ashworth stood with her hands clasped before her, watching her aunt, the formidable Lady Vivian Hartley, sign the final document that would seal her fate. "There," Lady Vivian announced, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she pressed her seal into hot wax. "By week's end, you shall be delivered to St. Catherine's Convent in the North Country. Out of sight, out of mind, and finally out of my household." Margot's cousin Arabella tittered from her chair by the fire, her golden ringlets bouncing with delight. A convent. How perfectly fitting for a girl with no name, no dowry, and no prospects. Margot Ashworth had learned to make herself small. It was a skill acquired over 15 years of living in the spaces between acknowledgement and invisibility, of existing in a household that tolerated her presence but never welcomed it. She moved through Ashford Hall like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the worn stone floors, her grey dresses carefully chosen to blend with shadows and wallpaper. In the mornings, she rose before the family to ensure the drawing-room fires were lit. During meals, she ate alone in the small parlour off the kitchens, the room where broken furniture went to die. In the evenings, she mended Arabella's gowns by candlelight, her fingers working until they ached while her cousin attended balls and theatre performances in London. "You missed a stitch here," Arabella would say, thrusting the dress back at her. "Really, Margot, must you be so careless? This gown cost more than you're worth." Lady Vivian never intervened. Why would she? Margot was useful. She could read and write, which made her valuable for correspondence Lady Vivian found tedious. She had a steady hand, which made her useful for mending and embroidery. She asked for nothing, which made her the perfect unpaid servant disguised as family. But Ashford Hall had not always been this way. Margot could still remember her father. Not clearly, she'd been only 7 when the fever took him, but she remembered sensations. The scratch of his wool coat when he lifted her. The smell of pipe tobacco and leather. The way his voice had softened when he looked at her mother's portrait, the one Lady Vivian had burned 3 days after his funeral. "Your mother seduced my brother," Lady Vivian had told her coldly on that terrible afternoon. "A merchant's daughter with aspirations above her station. She trapped him with her beauty and died giving birth to you, as perhaps she deserved. My brother, fool that he was, loved her anyway. He provided for you in his way, but he left you to us. You should be grateful we didn't cast you into the streets." Gratitude. That was the currency Margot was expected to pay for the privilege of sleeping in a servant's room and eating leftover food. Gratitude for being allowed to exist on the margins of a family that wished her gone. Her only respite came in stolen moments. The rose garden at dawn, where mist clung to the petals and no one else ventured. The library in the late afternoons, when Lady Vivian napped and Arabella occupied herself with fashion plates. The music room after supper, where Margot would play the pianoforte her father had commissioned, its ivory keys yellowed now with age but still capable of producing something beautiful. Mrs. Dawes, the head housekeeper, found her there one evening, her fingers moving through a Mozart sonata. "You play beautifully, child," the older woman said softly, settling onto the bench beside her. Mrs. Dawes had been with the family since before Margot was born. She'd known Margot's mother, had held Margot as an infant, and alone among the household staff, treated her with genuine affection. "Your mother played too, did you know? Your father would sit for hours just listening to her." "Lady Vivian says I shouldn't touch the instrument," Margot replied, her hands stilling on the keys. "She says it belonged to my father and I have no right to it." "Your father bought it for your mother," Mrs. Dawes corrected firmly. "Which means it should have been yours." But Lady Vivian has never let truth interfere with her cruelties. She paused, her weathered hand covering Margot's. "There's news, child. A letter arrived this afternoon. The Duke of Ravenscourt will be visiting. He arrives tomorrow evening." Margot's stomach tightened. "The Duke? Why?" Business regarding property lines, from what I overhead. But Lady Vivian is beside herself with excitement. She sees an opportunity for Arabella. Mrs. Dawes's voice dropped to a whisper. She's already instructed the staff. You're to keep to your room during his stay. She doesn't want him catching sight of you. Of course she didn't. Margot was the family secret, the stain that needed hiding when important guests arrived. She'd heard Lady Vivian's plans for Arabella, whispered conversations about court presentations and strategic marriages. A duke would be the ultimate prize. I understand, Margot said quietly, closing the pianoforte lid. I'll stay out of sight. Mrs. Dawes squeezed her hand. One day, child, someone will see you. Truly see you. And on that day, all of Lady Vivian's schemes will crumble to dust. Margot wanted to believe her. But 15 years of invisibility had taught her that fairy tales were for girls like Arabella, girls with golden hair and legitimate names and futures mapped out in ballrooms and marriage contracts. Girls like Margot simply survived, and hoped that survival would be enough. The Duke of Ravenscourt arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, his carriage bearing the Blackwood family crest pulling up the drive as church bells marked the hour. Margot watched from her window in the servants' wing, her small room offering a narrow view of the courtyard below. Even from this distance, Julian Blackwood commanded attention. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the unconscious grace of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. His dark hair gleamed in the fading sunlight, and when he turned to survey the manor's facade, Margot caught a glimpse of strong features and an expression of polite detachment. Lady Vivian swept out to greet him, Arabella positioned strategically at her side. Her cousin had been dressed and redressed 4 times that afternoon, finally settling on a gown of pale blue silk that matched her eyes. Her golden ringlets were threaded with ribbon, her cheeks artfully pinched to bring color to them. Your Grace, what an honor, Lady Vivian's voice carried up through the open window. May I present my daughter, Miss Arabella Hartley? Arabella's curtsy was perfection, practiced 100 times before her mirror. The Duke bowed politely, his expression revealing nothing. Margot let the curtain fall and turned away. She'd been given her instructions. Stay in her room during dinner. If summoned for any task, complete it quickly and disappear. Under no circumstances was she to linger where the Duke might see her. She tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. Tried to mend, but her stitches were uneven. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness until finally, near midnight, her restlessness drove her from her room. The house had settled into silence. Dinner had ended hours ago, the Duke retired to his guest chambers, the family to their beds. Margot knew she should stay hidden, but the walls of her small room felt suffocating. She needed air, space, something to quiet the strange anxiety humming beneath her skin. The library was her destination. It always was. In 15 years, no one had ever disturbed her there after midnight. The room was dark except for moonlight streaming through tall windows. Margot lit a single candle and moved to the shelves, running her fingers along leather spines until she found what she wanted, a volume of poetry she'd read a dozen times before. She settled into the window seat, tucking her feet beneath her, and opened to a familiar page. She didn't hear him enter. Didn't sense his presence until his voice cut through the silence. I apologize. I didn't realize anyone would be here at this hour. Margot's head snapped up, the book tumbling from her hands. The Duke of Ravenscourt stood in the doorway, still dressed in his evening clothes though his cravat was loosened, his dark hair slightly disheveled as though he'd been running his hands through it. Your Grace, she managed, scrambling to her feet and dropping into a curtsy. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Forgive me, I'll leave immediately. Please don't. He moved further into the room, and Margot saw his eyes clearly for the first time. They were gray, she realized. Gray like storm clouds, intelligent and searching. I'm the intruder here. I couldn't sleep and thought a book might help. I didn't mean to startle you. He bent to retrieve the fallen volume, his fingers brushing the page where it had landed. Byron, he observed, a hint of surprise in his voice. Not the usual choice for. He paused, and Margot saw him taking in her appearance, the plain grey dress, the lack of jewelry, the careful simplicity that marked her as neither family nor servant. For someone like me, she finished quietly. I was going to say for this late hour, he replied smoothly. Byron is best read with company and wine, not alone by candlelight. Far too melancholy for solitude. Something in his tone suggested he wasn't mocking her. Margot lifted her chin slightly, finding unexpected courage. Perhaps solitude requires melancholy. Or perhaps melancholy requires solitude. I've never been certain which comes first. A smile ghosted across his face, transforming his features from merely handsome to something more arresting. A philosopher's question. Do you often contemplate such things in the middle of the night? I often contemplate many things in the middle of the night, Your Grace. The night is when one can think without interruption. Julian, he said abruptly. When we're alone, I would prefer you call me Julian. The request was so unexpected, so improper, that Margot could only stare at him. I couldn't possibly. Why not? He moved closer, setting the book on the window seat beside her forgotten candle. We're two people who cannot sleep, alone in a library discussing poetry. Surely we can dispense with formality for a few moments. You don't understand, Margot said carefully. I'm not supposed to be here. Lady Vivian gave specific instructions that I remain out of sight during your visit. His eyes sharpened. And why would she issue such instructions? Heat flooded Margot's cheeks. How to explain her position without revealing the full extent of her humiliation? My presence is considered inconvenient. I'm the late master's daughter, but not, that is, my mother was not. I see, he interrupted gently, understanding dawning in his expression. But there was no disgust there, no dismissal. Only curiosity and something else Margot couldn't name. And what is your name? Margot. Margot Ashworth. Margot, he repeated, as though testing how it felt on his tongue. Tell me, Margot Ashworth, what else do you read besides Byron when the house is sleeping? She shouldn't answer. She should excuse herself and flee before Lady Vivian discovered this transgression. But something in Julian's eyes held her captive, a genuine interest she'd never encountered before, as though her thoughts and words actually mattered. Everything, she admitted. History, philosophy, novels when I can find them. My father's library became mine after he died, though I'm not certain anyone realizes I use it. Then they're fools, Julian said flatly. A librarian used is a tragedy. A mind eager to learn should be encouraged, not hidden away like something shameful. The word struck Margot like a physical blow. In 15 years, no one except Mrs. Dawes had ever suggested she deserved encouragement, that her existence might be valuable rather than burdensome. Your Grace, Julian, she corrected at his raised eyebrow, you should go. If anyone finds us here. Let them find us, he said, his voice carrying an edge of steel she hadn't heard before. I'm master of my own actions, Margot. And I find myself very interested in continuing this conversation. Their eyes met across the candlelit space, and something shifted in the air between them. Margot felt it like electricity, like the moment before lightning strikes. Julian felt it too, she could see it in the way his expression changed, in the slight intake of breath, in the intensity of his gaze. For the first time in her life, Margot Ashworth was truly seen. And nothing would ever be the same. Julian found her in the rose garden the next morning. Margot had risen before dawn as always, seeking the peace of mist-covered petals and birdsong before the household stirred. She was deadheading spent blooms when his voice came from behind her. I thought I might find you here. She whirled, nearly dropping her basket. Julian stood at the garden gate, dressed for riding in a coat of deep green that made his grey eyes luminous. He looked entirely too awake for such an early hour, entirely too pleased with himself. "Your Grace, you shouldn't. We established last night that you would call me Julian," he interrupted, moving along the gravel path toward her. "And I should do many things I don't. Rising at dawn to walk strange gardens, for instance. Yet here I am." Despite herself, Margot felt her lips curve. "The garden isn't strange. It's quite lovely, actually." "It is now." The words were simple, but the way he looked at her when he said them made heat bloom in her chest. "Tell me about these roses. I confess I know nothing about flowers beyond recognizing them when I see them." She should leave. Should make some excuse and flee before someone saw them. But Julian had settled onto the stone bench beside the rose arbor as though he had every right to be there, and his expression held such genuine interest that Margot found herself staying. "These are damask roses," she explained, touching a pale pink bloom. "They're old, planted when the manor was first built. My father used to say they'd outlive us all if we cared for them properly." "You care for them yourself?" "No one else does. The gardeners tend the formal beds near the house, but they consider these too much trouble. Too wild, they say. I think that's why I like them." Julian's eyes never left her face. "Because they're survivors. Because they bloom despite neglect." The observation was so accurate, so intimate, that Margot's breath caught. No one had ever seen her with such clarity, had understood without her having to explain. She turned away, busying herself with the roses to hide the emotion threatening to spill over. They talked for an hour, maybe more. About books and music and the world beyond Yorkshire's hills. Julian spoke of his travels through Italy, of art galleries in Florence and ancient ruins in Rome. Margot shared her dreams of seeing London, of hearing a real orchestra, of walking through the British Museum she'd only read about. "I could show you," Julian said quietly. "All of it. If you wanted." The suggestion hung between them, weighted with implications Margot didn't dare examine. Their second encounter came that afternoon. Lady Vivian had sent Margot to retrieve embroidery silk from the village, a task designed to keep her away during the Duke's scheduled tour of the estate with Arabella. But Julian had somehow managed to separate himself from his hostess, claiming a need to examine property markers alone. He found Margot on the lane leading back to Ashford Hall. "This is becoming a habit," she said, unable to suppress her smile when he fell into step beside her. "A pleasant one, I hope. A dangerous one. Lady Vivian will be furious if she discovers." "Let her be furious." Julian stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Margot, I need you to understand something. I didn't come to Ashford Hall seeking a wife. I came for a tedious discussion about property boundaries. But then I found you in that library, and everything changed." "Your Grace." "Julian." "Julian," she corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. "You cannot mean what you're suggesting. We've known each other less than 2 days. You know nothing about me. I know you're intelligent and passionate about ideas. I know you find beauty in neglected things and refuse to let your circumstances diminish your spirit. I know that in 2 days, you've captivated me more thoroughly than any woman I've met in 30 years. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Tell me you feel nothing, and I'll leave tomorrow and never trouble you again. But if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, stop." Margot held up a hand, panic rising in her throat. "You must stop. I am nobody. I have no fortune, no family who claims me, no prospects. Lady Vivian has already made arrangements to send me to a convent because I'm an embarrassment she can no longer afford to maintain. You are a duke. You cannot possibly understand what it means to be so utterly powerless." "Then let me give you power," Julian said fiercely. "Let me." Whatever he might have said was cut short by Arabella's shrill voice carrying across the field. There you are, Your Grace. Mother has been looking everywhere for you. Arabella appeared over the rise, her face flushed with exertion and something darker, suspicion that hardened into rage when she saw Margot standing beside Julian. What is she doing here? Arabella demanded, drawing herself up to her full height. Mother specifically ordered her to remain out of sight. Miss Ashworth was returning from the village, Julian replied coolly. I encountered her on the road. How unfortunate for you. Arabella's eyes glittered with malice. Come, Your Grace. Mother has planned refreshments on the terrace. I'm certain you'll find the company there far more suitable. It was a dismissal, clear and cutting. Julian's jaw tightened, but Margot touched his arm lightly. Go, she murmured. Please. She fled before he could protest, her basket of silk clutched to her chest, her heart hammering. Behind her, she heard Arabella's voice, sharp with accusation, and Julian's low response she couldn't make out. Mrs. Dawes was waiting when Margot stumbled through the kitchen door. Child, what have you done? The housekeeper whispered urgently, pulling her into the pantry. Lady Vivian is in a rage. Arabella told her she saw you with the Duke, alone on the road. She's threatening to send you away tonight in— I know. Mrs. Dawes gripped her shoulders. But Margot, you must listen to me. I see how he looks at you. I saw it at dinner last night when he thought no one was watching. But dukes don't marry penniless girls with no family, no matter what they feel in the moment. That's not how their world works. I know that, Margot said, tears burning her eyes. I've always known that. Then protect yourself, Mrs. Dawes urged. Don't let yourself hope. Hope is dangerous for girls like us. But it was too late. Hope had already taken root, and Margot feared it would destroy her. That evening, Lady Vivian summoned her. You have humiliated me, her aunt hissed, her face white with fury. Throwing yourself at our guest, making a spectacle. I should have sent you away years ago. I didn't throw myself. Silence. Lady Vivian's hand cracked across Margot's cheek. You will remain in your room for the duration of the Duke's stay. If I see you anywhere near him again, I will turn you out without a reference. Do you understand me? Margot understood perfectly. She was trapped, powerless, and falling in love with a man whose world she could never enter. Hope, she was learning, was the cruelest thing of all. The confrontation came the following afternoon in Lady Vivian's private sitting room. Margot knew something had happened from the way servants whispered in corners and avoided her eyes. Mrs. Dawes had brought her breakfast with trembling hands and tears on her weathered face, but wouldn't explain. Even locked in her room as she'd been since yesterday's slap, Margot could feel the tension crackling through Ashford Hall like lightning before a storm. She heard the shouting first. Lady Vivian's voice, shrill with outrage, carrying up through the floorboards. Then Julian's, lower but laced with steel. The argument raged for what felt like hours before silence finally fell, heavy and ominous. Mrs. Dawes came for her as the afternoon sun slanted through her narrow window. She wants you downstairs, the housekeeper said, her voice hollow. Oh, child. He asked for you. The Duke formally requested permission to court you. Margot's heart lurched. He what? He asked for your hand. Walked straight into her sitting room after luncheon and declared his intentions as bold as brass. Said he wished to court you properly, with the aim of marriage. Mrs. Dawes wiped her eyes. I've never seen Lady Vivian in such a state. She's beside herself. What did she say? You'll hear it yourself soon enough. Come now. Don't keep her waiting. Lady Vivian stood by the fireplace in her sitting room, her face mottled with rage barely contained. Arabella sat on the chaise, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying. Neither looked at Margot when she entered. You scheming little whore, Lady Vivian began without preamble. You think I don't see what you've done? Throwing yourself at him like a common street girl, using your mother's tricks to bewitch a man above your station. I did nothing. You did everything. Arabella shrieked, surging to her feet. He was supposed to notice me. Mother planned it for months. And you ruined everything, you bastard, you nobody. Arabella, sit down. Lady Vivian's voice was ice. She turned her full attention to Margot, and the hatred in her eyes was so pure it was almost beautiful. The Duke of Ravenscourt came to me this afternoon with a preposterous proposal. He wishes to court you. To marry you, if you can believe such madness. The words should have filled Margot with joy. Instead, they filled her with dread. She knew that tone, knew the particular quality of her aunt's fury when she'd been crossed. I refused him, of course, Lady Vivian continued. I am your legal guardian until you reach your majority, which is still 2 years hence. I told him in no uncertain terms that I would never consent to such a union. That you are my ward, and I will dispose of you as I see fit. You cannot refuse him, Margot whispered. He's a duke. I can and I have. The law is quite clear on guardian rights, even when dukes come asking. Lady Vivian moved closer, her smile sharp as broken glass. Do you know what else I told him? I told him you'll be leaving for St. Catherine's Convent tomorrow morning at first light. I've already sent word to the abbess. She expects you by week's end. The room tilted. Tomorrow? But you said, the arrangements weren't. Plans change. I won't have you in this house another day, poisoning my daughter's prospects and making fools of us all. You'll take holy orders and live out your miserable life in prayer and silence, exactly as you deserve. Mother, what did he say? Arabella asked eagerly. When you told him about the convent? Lady Vivian's smile widened. He threatened, of course. Spoke of magistrates and legal challenges and all manner of empty posturing. But in the end, he accepted reality. He left Ashford Hall not an hour ago. His carriage was loaded, his servants dismissed. He's gone back to London, and good riddance. The words hit Margot like physical blows. Gone. Julian had left. Whatever he'd felt, whatever connection had sparked between them, it hadn't been strong enough to fight for. Of course it hadn't. Mrs. Dawes had warned her. Dukes didn't marry penniless nobodies, not really. Not when faced with the messy reality of guardian laws and social scandal. I see I've finally shocked you into silence, Lady Vivian observed with satisfaction. Did you truly believe he'd rescue you? That he'd sweep you away to his grand estate like some fairy tale? You stupid, foolish girl. Men like the Duke of Ravenscourt don't throw away their reputations for bastards. They have their amusements, speak their pretty words, and return to their proper worlds when complications arise. It wasn't like that, Margot managed, but her voice cracked. Wasn't it? Then where is he now? Lady Vivian gestured toward the window. Not here, fighting for you. Not demanding anything. He accepted my refusal like a gentleman and departed. That should tell you everything you need to know about how much you actually mattered to him. Arabella giggled, the sound high and cruel. Poor Margot. Did you really think a duke would choose you over me? You, with your plain face and plainer dresses and no fortune to recommend you? That's enough, Arabella. Lady Vivian turned back to Margot. You'll be confined to your room for the remainder of the evening. Mrs. Hodge will accompany you to the convent tomorrow. You're permitted one small trunk. I suggest you spend tonight packing and praying for the forgiveness you'll need for the sins of vanity and presumption. Aunt Vivian, please. I am not your aunt, Lady Vivian snapped. I never was. Your father's charity obligated me to house you, but that obligation ends tomorrow. Be grateful I'm sending you somewhere with walls and food. I could just as easily turn you out to starve. Margot was dismissed with a wave of Lady Vivian's hand, sent back to her room like a prisoner to her cell. Mrs. Dawes followed, her presence a small comfort in the gathering darkness. "He left," Margot whispered once they were alone. "Julian left." "I know, child." Mrs. Dawes held her while she wept. "But perhaps he had reasons." "Perhaps." "Don't." Margot pulled away, scrubbing at her tears. "Don't make excuses for him. He asked for something he knew he couldn't have, made me hope for something impossible, and then abandoned me when it became difficult. That's the truth of it." She moved to the window, staring out at the road Julian's carriage had taken hours ago. The same road that would carry her to the convent tomorrow, to a life of silence and enclosure and the death of every dream she'd been foolish enough to harbor. "You tried to warn me," Margot said quietly. "You told me hope was dangerous." "I did. But I also hoped I was wrong." Mrs. Dawes joined her at the window. "Life is cruel to girls like us, Margot. It shows us beauty and then snatches it away. But you'll survive this. You're stronger than Lady Vivian knows." Margot wasn't sure she believed that. She felt shattered, hollowed out, the brief joy of the past 3 days replaced by an ache so profound she could barely breathe around it. Julian was gone. Tomorrow she would be too. And the dream, the impossible, foolish dream of being seen, being valued, being loved, was over before it had truly begun. ID. Mrs. Dawes returned near midnight, breathless and trembling with urgency. Margot had been sitting at her small desk, staring at the blank page before her. Her trunk stood half-packed in the corner, a pitiful collection of worn dresses and a few cherished books. In 6 hours, the carriage would arrive. In 6 hours, her life as she knew it would end. "He didn't leave," Mrs. Dawes whispered, closing the door firmly behind her. "The Duke. He's still in the village." Margot's head snapped up. "What?" "Tom, the stable boy, just returned from the Hound and Hart Inn. He was delivering a message for Lady Vivian when he saw the Duke's carriage in the inn yard. His Grace took rooms there this afternoon. He never went back to London at all." Something flickered in Margot's chest. Not hope, not yet, but something dangerously close. "Why would he stay?" "I don't know, child. But he's there, and you have one night before they take you away." Mrs. Dawes moved to the desk, pressing paper and ink toward Margot with shaking hands. "Write to him. Tell him everything, about the convent, about the morning departure. Tell him what you feel, what you fear. Give him the chance to act." "He won't come," Margot said, but her hand was already reaching for the pen. "He left without fighting." "Why would a letter change anything?" "Because he doesn't know about tomorrow morning. Lady Vivian told him the convent arrangements were weeks away, giving him time to mount a legal challenge. She lied to him, Margot. He thinks he has time." Mrs. Dawes gripped her shoulder. "Write quickly. I'll take it to him myself." The words poured out in a torrent. Margot's hand flew across the page, ink smudging beneath her palm as she wrote with desperate speed. She told him everything, Lady Vivian's lies about the timing, the carriage arranged for dawn, her terror of a life behind convent walls. She told him about the 3 days they'd shared, how he'd made her feel seen for the first time in her life. She told him she understood if he couldn't help, if the complications were too great, but she needed him to know. Needed him to understand that she'd dared to hope, even knowing hope was dangerous. She signed it simply, "Yours, if you'll have me. Margot." Mrs. Dawes tucked the letter into her bodice and pulled her cloak around her shoulders. "I'll go now, while the house sleeps. The walk to the village is under an hour. Mrs. Dawes, if Lady Vivian discovers what you've done. I'm old, child. I've saved enough coin over the years to manage. But you're young, and you deserve a chance at happiness. I won't stand by and watch that chance slip away because I was too cowardly to walk to a village inn." The housekeeper kissed Margot's forehead. "Stay here. Wait. If there's to be a miracle, we'll need you ready." She slipped out, leaving Margot alone with her racing heart and the slow tick of the mantel clock. The hours that followed were agony. Margot couldn't sit, couldn't pace, couldn't do anything but stare at the door and will Mrs. Dawes to return safely. What if the letter never reached Julian? What if he'd already departed despite Tom's report? What if he read it and chose not to act, deciding a convent-bound bastard wasn't worth the scandal and effort? The clock struck 1. Then 2. Then 3. Mrs. Dawes finally returned as the first grey light of dawn touched the horizon. She was flushed from her rapid walk, her eyes bright with something that might have been triumph or might have been tears. "I gave it to him directly," she reported, breathing hard. "Walked straight into the Hound and Hart and demanded to see the Duke of Ravenscourt. The innkeeper tried to stop me, but his grace heard the commotion and came down himself." "What did he say?" Margot gripped the older woman's hands. "Mrs. Dawes, what did he say?" "He read it right there in the common room. Went pale as death, then such fury came into his face as I've never seen in a gentleman. He called for his secretary immediately, started writing letters and dispatching writers before I'd even left. He said," Mrs. Dawes's voice broke. "He said to tell you he's coming. That no power on earth would keep him from you. Those were his exact words, child. No power on earth." Margot pressed her hands to her mouth, torn between laughter and sobs. "But how? Lady Vivian has the law on her side. The carriage arrives in 3 hours. Even if he wants to help, what can he possibly do?" "I don't know. But he's the Duke of Ravenscourt, Margot. He has wealth and connections beyond anything Lady Vivian can claim. If anyone can find a way." A knock at the door made them both freeze. Arabella's voice came through, sharp and gleeful. "Margot. Mother says to dress for travel. The carriage will be ready within the hour. Mrs. Hodge is waiting in the hall." Mrs. Dawes squeezed Margot's hands. "Dress. Pack your trunk. Play along. We need to buy him time. But if he doesn't come, then at least you tried," Mrs. Dawes said firmly. "At least you reached for something beautiful instead of accepting defeat. That's more than most of us ever do." Margot dressed with numb fingers, pulling on her traveling dress of drab brown wool. The same dress she'd worn when her father died. The same dress she'd worn to every funeral and farewell since. It felt like a burial shroud. She heard the carriage arrive, heard the bustle of the household stirring, heard Lady Vivian's voice directing servants with brisk satisfaction. Her trunk was carried down. Mrs. Hodge appeared to collect her, the woman's face expressionless but not unkind. "Time to go, miss," Mrs. Hodge said quietly. Margot descended the stairs like a condemned prisoner walking to the scaffold. Lady Vivian and Arabella waited in the entrance hall, both dressed as though for a celebration. The servants stood in a line, their faces carefully neutral though several of the younger maids had tears on their cheeks. The carriage door stood open. Mrs. Hodge waited beside it. In moments, Margot would be inside, and the horses would carry her away from Ashford Hall, from the Rose Garden, from Mrs. Dawes, from the library where Julian had first seen her. From any chance of the miracle Mrs. Dawes believed in. "Well?" Lady Vivian prompted. "Get in. The Sisters of St. Catherine's are expecting you." Margot took one step toward the carriage. Then another. And then she heard it, the thunder of horses approaching at speed, the shout of men's voices, the sound of hope arriving just as despair opened its jaws to swallow her whole. The riders swept up Ashford Hall's drive like an avenging army. Julian led them, magnificent astride a black stallion, his face set with such determination that even from a distance, Margot could see he'd come prepared for battle. Behind him rode 4 other men, his secretary, 2 gentlemen in sober black who carried the unmistakable bearing of the law, and an older man in clerical robes whose silver cross gleamed in the morning light. Lady Vivian's triumph curdled into shock. What is the meaning of this? Julian dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward them with such command that servants scattered from his path. His eyes found Margot immediately, and the relief that flashed across his face was so raw, so genuine, that her breath caught. "Your Grace," Lady Vivian recovered quickly, drawing herself up with icy dignity. "This is highly irregular. I thought I made our position clear yesterday." "You lied to me," Julian interrupted, his voice cutting through her words like steel through silk. "You told me the convent arrangements were weeks away. You never mentioned that you intended to exile Miss Ashworth this very morning. I'm under no obligation to share my household arrangements with you. Gentlemen." Julian gestured to the men who'd accompanied him. "Present the documents." The taller of the two black-clad men stepped forward, producing papers sealed with official stamps. "I am Magistrate Thornbury of York County. I have here an emergency petition filed by His Grace the Duke of Ravenscourt requesting immediate review of Miss Margot Ashworth's guardianship on grounds of coercion and mistreatment." Lady Vivian's face went from white to scarlet. "This is outrageous. I am her legal guardian, appointed by her own father's will." "A father who never married her mother," Julian said coldly. "A father who left her nothing, acknowledged her minimally, and consigned her to your dubious care. The legitimacy of such guardianship arrangements can be questioned, particularly when evidence suggests abuse of that guardianship." "Abuse? I've housed and fed the ungrateful chit for 15 years. You've used her as unpaid labor, denied her proper education, concealed her existence from society, and now attempt to imprison her in a convent against her will." Julian's voice could have frozen fire. "That is not guardianship, Lady Vivian. That is servitude disguised as charity." Arabella clutched her mother's arm. "Mother, make him stop. Tell him he can't do this." "He can't," Lady Vivian insisted, but uncertainty crept into her voice. "The law gives me authority until she reaches majority. Even a duke cannot override." "Which brings us to the elegant solution," Julian interrupted. He turned to the elderly cleric, who stepped forward with a warm smile that contrasted sharply with the tension crackling through the courtyard. "May I introduce Father Edmund, personal representative of the Archbishop of Canterbury. He has graciously agreed to perform an urgent ceremony." Margot's heart stopped. Then started again, racing so fast she felt dizzy. "You cannot be serious," Lady Vivian whispered. "I am entirely serious." Julian moved to stand directly before Margot, taking both her hands in his. The touch sent fire through her veins. "I'm asking you to marry me, Margot Ashworth. Here. Now. This very moment. Once we're wed, your aunt's guardianship becomes void. You'll be my wife, my Duchess, and no one can send you anywhere against your will ever again." "This is madness," Lady Vivian shrieked. "She's a nobody. A bastard with no fortune, no family, no prospects. You'll ruin yourself. The only ruin I see is the one you've inflicted on an innocent woman for 15 years. Julian's eyes never left Margot's face. "But I need your answer, Margot. I know this is sudden. I know we've barely known each other 3 days. But I also know what I feel is real and true. Will you trust me? Will you take this leap with me?" Margot's vision blurred with tears. Around her, she heard Mrs. Dawes crying, heard the servants whispering, heard Lady Vivian's continued protests growing increasingly shrill. But all of it faded beside Julian's steady gaze, the warmth of his hands holding hers, the promise she saw written in every line of his face. "I have nothing to bring to this marriage," she whispered. "No dowry, no connections, nothing but myself." "You are everything," Julian said fiercely. "Your intelligence, your strength, your capacity to find beauty in neglected things, those are worth more than all the dowries in England. Say yes, Margot. Say yes and let me spend the rest of my life proving you were right to trust me. Yes. The word came out choked with emotion, then stronger, louder. Yes, Julian. I'll marry you. His smile transformed his entire face. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing them with such tenderness that fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. This is illegal. Lady Vivian lunged forward as though to physically separate them, but Magistrate Thornbury blocked her path. Actually, madam, it is entirely legal. Miss Ashworth is of age to consent to marriage. The Duke has obtained a special license from the Archbishop. And once the ceremony is performed, your guardianship, questionable as its origins may be, will indeed be void. Father Edmund, if you please, Julian said, never releasing Margot's hands. The ceremony that followed would be spoken of for years in every drawing room and servants' hall in Yorkshire. There, on the gravel drive of Ashford Hall, with a household of stunned witnesses and a furious Lady Vivian prevented from interfering by a magistrate's authority, Margot Ashworth married the Duke of Ravenscourt. She wore her travelling dress of brown wool. He wore his riding clothes, dust-stained from his journey. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration. Just Father Edmund's steady voice speaking the ancient words, Julian's grey eyes locked on hers with such intensity she couldn't look away, and her own trembling voice promising to love and honor the man who had ridden to her rescue when all seemed lost. I now pronounce you man and wife, Father Edmund concluded with evident satisfaction. Your Grace, you may kiss your bride. Julian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. My Duchess, he murmured. Then he kissed her with such passion and tenderness that the watching servant sighed audibly and even Magistrate Thornbury looked away with a smile. When they finally broke apart, Julian turned to face Lady Vivian with cold triumph. My wife and I will be departing now. Should you attempt to interfere with her again in any way, you will discover precisely how unpleasant I can make life for those who threaten what is mine. He paused, his voice dropping to something far more dangerous. And should you ever strike her again, as I understand you did 2 days ago, you will learn that dukes have very long memories and very powerful connections. Lady Vivian stood frozen, her mouth working soundlessly. Arabella had collapsed against her mother, sobbing hysterically. The servant stared in open-mouthed shock. Mrs. Dawes wept freely, her weathered hands clasped in prayer. Julian turned to the housekeeper. Mrs. Dawes, I believe. My wife has spoken of your kindness. I hope you'll consent to join our household at Ravenscourt. Her Grace will need familiar faces during her adjustment, and I can always use loyal staff. It would be my honor, Your Grace, Mrs. Dawes managed through her tears. Excellent. Collect your things. You'll travel with us in the ducal carriage. Julian looked around at the assembled servants. In fact, any member of this household who wishes employment at Ravenscourt need only present themselves within the fortnight. My wife values loyalty, and I value her happiness. He offered Margot his arm. Come, my dear. Let us leave this place and begin our life together. Margot placed her hand on his arm, still feeling as though she moved through a dream. As they walked toward the magnificent carriage bearing the Blackwood crest, she glanced back once at Ashford Hall. At Lady Vivian's rage-contorted face. At Arabella's theatrical weeping. At the home that had been her prison for 15 years. Any regrets? Julian asked softly. Margot looked up at the man who was now her husband, who had fought for her when everyone said dukes didn't fight for penniless nobodies. Who had seen her truly and chosen her anyway. Not a single one, she whispered. And meant it with every fiber of her being. Ravenscourt estate sprawled across the Hampshire countryside like something from a dream. Margot had thought Ashford Hall impressive with its weathered stone and modest gardens. But Julian's ancestral home was a masterpiece, for stories of honey-colored limestone, vast windows gleaming in the afternoon sun, formal gardens that seemed to stretch forever, and beyond them, parkland dotted with ancient oaks. It's too much, she whispered as their carriage rolled up the endless drive. "Julian, I can't possibly." "You can," he said firmly, his hand covering hers. "And you will. This is your home now, Margot. Everything you see belongs to you as much as it belongs to me." The staff assembled to greet their new mistress numbered over 100. Margot felt their curious gazes as she descended from the carriage, felt the weight of their expectations. These people's livelihoods now rested partly in her hands. One mistake, one wrong word, and she could make their lives difficult. Julian must have sensed her panic. He kept his hand at the small of her back, a steady anchor as he introduced her to the butler, the head housekeeper, the steward. Mrs. Dawes had been installed as senior housekeeper, her familiar face among the sea of strangers a blessed relief. "Welcome home, Your Grace," the butler intoned formally. Your Grace. Eyes, something shifted inside her. Perhaps she could grow into this role. Perhaps, with time, she could become the Duchess Ravenscourt deserved. The first weeks passed in a whirlwind. There was so much to learn: the running of the household, the management of the estate, the complex web of social obligations that came with her new position. Julian proved himself an attentive and patient husband, guiding her through the intricacies without ever making her feel inadequate. He seemed to take genuine pleasure in watching her grow into her role, celebrating each small victory as she mastered some new aspect of her duties. But more than the estate management or social responsibilities, Julian courted her. Despite their marriage being a fait accompli, he wooed her properly. He brought her roses from the greenhouse each morning. He took her riding across the parkland, showing her every corner of the land that was now hers. He read to her by the fire in the evenings, sharing his favorite books and discussing everything from poetry to politics with the intellectual respect she'd craved all her life. And at night, in the privacy of their chambers, he taught her that passion and tenderness could exist together, that being loved could feel like coming home. "You're happy?" he asked one evening, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Terrified and happy," Margot admitted. "Is that possible?" "I think it's the only honest way to feel when your entire life changes in a morning." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But there's something we need to discuss. We've been hiding here at Ravenscourt for nearly a month. Eventually, we must face society." Margot's stomach tightened. "I know. The Duchess of Pembroke is hosting a ball at the end of the week. It's one of the premier events of the season. If we attend, if we face the ton together, it will establish your position permanently. But I won't force you, Margot. If you're not ready." "I'll never be ready," she interrupted. "But you're right. We can't hide forever." She sat up, meeting his eyes. "I'm your wife. Your Duchess. I won't shame you by cowering in the country." Pride flashed across his face. "You could never shame me. But I admit, I'm eager for society to meet the woman who captured my heart." The ball at Pembroke House exceeded even the most elaborate imaginings. The London mansion blazed with thousands of candles, their light reflecting off gilt mirrors and crystal chandeliers. The cream of English society filled the rooms, lords and ladies dripping with jewels, fortunes on display in silk and satin, the air thick with perfume and ambition. When the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscourt were announced, a ripple of interest swept through the assembled guests. Everyone had heard the scandalous tale, the sudden marriage to a penniless relation, the dramatic rescue from a convent exile. Speculation had run wild about the mysterious new Duchess. Margot entered on Julian's arm, her bearing regal despite the butterflies rioting in her stomach. The modiste he'd summoned from London had created a gown of deep sapphire silk that shimmered with every movement. The Ravenscourt sapphires, reset specifically for her, gleamed at her throat and ears. She looked every inch a duchess, even if she still felt like an impostor. "Breathe," Julian murmured. "You're magnificent, and they can all sense it." The evening proved less daunting than she'd feared. Julian remained at her side, his pride in her evident to all who observed them. And to her surprise, Many of the aristocratic ladies showed genuine warmth rather than the disdain she'd expected. Perhaps Julian's rank and obvious devotion granted her protection. Or perhaps her story of rescue and transformation appealed to their romantic sensibilities. The Duchess of Pembroke herself sought them out, her sharp eyes assessing Margot with evident curiosity. "So you're the young woman who has accomplished what dozens of society mamas failed to do, caught England's most eligible bachelor." The older woman's lips curved. "And did it while wearing a brown traveling dress, no less. How refreshingly unconventional. Your Grace, I—" "Oh, don't stammer, child. I approve." Ashford needed someone with spirit rather than another vapid beauty with impeccable bloodlines and empty conversation. She tapped Margot's arm with her fan. "Welcome to your new world. Use your position wisely. God knows we need more women of substance among the ton." It was a clear signal of acceptance, and its effect was immediate. Those who might have cut the new Duchess now pressed forward to make her acquaintance. But the evening's true test came when Margot glimpsed a familiar figure across the ballroom. Lady Vivian stood near the refreshment table, her face pinched with bitterness. Arabella hovered beside her, looking diminished and unhappy in a gown that tried too hard to compete with the elegance surrounding her. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For a moment, Margot felt 15 years of humiliation crash over her, every insult, every slap, every moment of being made to feel worthless. Then Julian's hand covered hers, and she remembered who she was now. She crossed the ballroom toward them, aware of the watching eyes, the whispers that followed her movement. Julian stayed close but let her lead. "Lady Vivian." "Arabella." Margot's voice was steady, gracious. "I hope you're both well." Her former guardian looked as though she'd been struck. She'd clearly not expected Margot to acknowledge her existence, let alone approach with courtesy. "Your Grace," Lady Vivian managed stiffly. "I wanted to thank you," Margot continued, and though the words cost her, they were genuine. "You gave me a home when I had none. Yes, it was difficult. Yes, there was cruelty. But it also gave me strength, taught me resilience, and eventually led me to Julian. So I am grateful, despite everything." Arabella's eyes filled with tears. "You should hate us. I was horrible to you." "I choose not to carry that burden," Margot said simply. She looked at her cousin with compassion rather than triumph. "You're young yet, Arabella. There's time to find your own happiness, your own path. I hope you do." She turned to leave, then paused. "If you should ever need assistance, either of you, you need only write. I bear you no ill will. I hope you can find your own peace." She walked away, leaving them standing in stunned silence. Julian's expression held something close to awe. "That," he murmured, "was remarkable. Most people would have savored the revenge." "Revenge is exhausting," Margot replied. "And I'd rather spend my energy on more worthwhile things. Such as figuring out how to use this position for good. There are girls like I was, Julian. Forgotten, powerless, trapped in situations they can't escape. With our wealth and influence. We can help them," he finished, his smile widening. "I married a woman with a remarkable mind and an even more remarkable heart." As the evening wore on, Margot felt something profound shift inside her. She would never forget where she came from, never lose sight of what it meant to be powerless. But she was no longer that frightened girl in brown wool. She was the Duchess of Ravenscourt, and she intended to use that power to ensure other girls received the chances she'd been denied. The transformation was complete. The invisible girl had become impossible to overlook. Spring arrived at Ravenscourt with a riot of color, daffodils carpeting the parkland, cherry blossoms drifting like snow across the terrace, and Margot's hand pressed to her gently swelling belly as she stood in the rose garden she'd claimed as her own. "You're glowing," Julian observed, coming up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist, his hands settling protectively over hers. Though the midwife says you should be resting more. The midwife says a great many things, Margot replied with a smile. I'm perfectly healthy, Julian. Women have been carrying children since the dawn of time. You're not just any woman, he murmured against her hair. You're my wife, the love of my life, and I reserve the right to fret. 10 months had passed since their dramatic wedding on Ashford Hall's drive. 10 months of happiness so profound that Margot sometimes woke in the night convinced it must be a dream, that she'd open her eyes to find herself back in her narrow servant's room with Lady Vivian's voice echoing down the corridor. But Julian was always there in those moments, solid and real, pulling her close and reminding her that this life, their life, was no fantasy. The news of her pregnancy had sent him into transports of joy tempered by fierce protectiveness. He'd wanted to wrap her in cotton wool, to prevent her from doing anything more strenuous than sitting by the fire. It had taken considerable negotiation to make him understand that she had no intention of spending the next 6 months as an invalid. I need to stay active, she'd told him firmly. There's too much work to be done. The work had become her passion. Within weeks of arriving at Ravenscourt, Margot had begun using her position to effect change. She'd started small, a school for the estate's tenant children, ensuring they received education regardless of their family's circumstances. Then larger, a charity program supporting young women in vulnerable situations, girls like she had been, trapped with no resources and no escape. Julian had supported every initiative with enthusiasm and considerable funding. I married a revolutionary, he'd said with pride when she'd proposed purchasing a building in London to house a school for orphaned girls. You married someone who remembers what it feels like to be powerless, Margot had corrected. And who intends to ensure other girls have opportunities one was denied. The programs had grown beyond her initial imaginings. The Ravenscourt Foundation, as it came to be known, now operated 3 schools, 2 orphanages, and a network of supporters throughout England. Margot had discovered a talent for organization and persuasion, for convincing wealthy patrons to open their purses for causes they'd never considered. She'd found her purpose, and it filled her with satisfaction that rivaled even her happiness with Julian. Mrs. Dawes had become her right hand in all of it. The older woman thrived in her position at Ravenscourt, her wisdom and experience invaluable as Margot navigated the complex world of charitable work. They spent mornings together reviewing applications from girls seeking assistance, afternoons meeting with potential donors, evenings planning new initiatives. You've built something extraordinary, Mrs. Dawes told her one afternoon as they reviewed the latest reports from their London school. These girls you're helping, you're giving them futures, Margot. Futures they never would have had otherwise. We're giving them what you gave me, Margot replied, squeezing the older woman's hand. Hope. Someone who believes in them. The chance to become more than their circumstances would allow. She glanced down at the letter in her lap, one of dozens that arrived weekly from grateful families, from girls who'd found employment through their programs, from teachers at their schools reporting on student progress. Each one felt like a small victory, proof that her painful past had not been meaningless. That evening, as she and Julian sat by the fire in their private sitting room, she shared the day's correspondence. Listen to this one, she said, unfolding a letter written in careful script. It's from Sarah, one of the first girls we placed in service. She's been promoted to head housemaid and has saved enough to send her younger sister to our school. She writes, Your Grace, you gave me a chance when I had nothing. Now I can give my sister the same. Thank you for seeing us when the world looked past us. Julian set down his book, his gray eyes reflecting firelight and something deeper. Do you know what I love most about you? My sparkling wit? Margot teased. My graceful dancing? Your capacity to transform pain into purpose. Most people who suffered as you did would become bitter, would use their power for revenge or self-indulgence. But you looked at your new position and immediately asked how you could use it to help others. He moved to sit beside her, pulling her close. You make me want to be better, Margot. To do more. To matter beyond my title and fortune. You already do, she assured him. You saved me, Julian. Not just from the convent, but from a life of believing I was worthless. I think we saved each other, he murmured, his hand finding her belly again. I was so alone before you. Surrounded by people but utterly isolated, going through the motions of my life without real connection or purpose. Then I walked into that library and found you, and everything changed. They sat in comfortable silence, his hand warm against her stomach, the fire crackling, the future spreading before them bright with possibility. What shall we name our daughter? Margot asked. They'd been discussing it for weeks. You're certain it's a girl? I am. Call it intuition. Julian smiled. Then I think we should name her Catherine. After the saint whose convent you never reached. A reminder that sometimes the paths we're forced toward lead us exactly where we need to be, even if we have to take dramatic detours to get there. Catherine Blackwood, Margot tested the name. I like it. Strong and classic. Like her mother. Julian pressed a kiss to her temple. She'll have your intelligence and compassion, I hope. Your strength. Though I wouldn't mind if she inherited my height. You're rather frustratingly short when I try to kiss you while standing. Margot laughed, the sound free and joyous. A year ago, such easy happiness would have seemed impossible. A year ago, she'd been packing a trunk for convent exile, convinced her life held nothing but darkness and silence. Now she sat in luxury with a husband who adored her, carrying their child, building programs that would outlive them both and help thousands of girls who would never know her name but would benefit from her vision. I used to think happiness was for other people, she admitted quietly. That girls like me survived but never thrived. And now? Now I know that worth isn't inherited or granted by others. It's inherent. Every girl in our programs has value, has potential, regardless of their birth or circumstances. Just as I did, though it took you to help me see it. Julian turned her face toward his expression serious. No, my love. I saw it. But you claimed it. You became the woman you were always meant to be, I simply had the honor of witnessing the transformation. Catherine arrived on a warm June morning, her first cries filling Ravenscourt with joy. Julian wept openly when he held his daughter, overcome by love and wonder. Margot watched her husband cradling their child and felt her heart swell with emotions almost too powerful to contain. Mrs. Dawes became Catherine's devoted nurse, rocking her for hours and singing the same lullabies she'd once sung to Margot. The circle of love continued across generations, healing old wounds and creating new bonds. The Ravenscourt Foundation expanded further. A fourth school opened. Then a fifth. Margot traveled to Parliament, lobbying for legal reforms that would protect vulnerable children. She wrote articles for progressive publications, hosted fundraising events, became known throughout England as a champion for the powerless. The Duchess of Second Chances, one newspaper called her. Her Grace who remembers. Margot kept every article, every letter, every small piece of evidence that her painful past had been transformed into purpose. She would share them with Catherine one day, would teach her daughter that privilege carried responsibility, that power should be used to lift others rather than keep them down. The invisible girl had become impossible to ignore. And she intended to use every ounce of that visibility to ensure other invisible girls were finally seen. 25 years after a desperate wedding on a gravel driveway, Margot Blackwood, Duchess of Ravenscourt, stood in the portrait gallery watching the artist apply final touches to the canvas that would hang there for generations to come. The painting depicted her and Julian surrounded by their 3 children, now grown into remarkable adults who had exceeded even her proudest dreams. Catherine stood beside her mother, 24 years old and radiating the quiet confidence of a woman who had never doubted her worth. She'd married a viscount who valued her intellect as much as her beauty and now worked alongside Margot expanding the Ravenscourt Foundation throughout Europe. Charles, their son at 22, had inherited his father's title as heir but also his mother's social conscience. He sat in Parliament championing reform legislation, his voice respected even by those who disagreed with his progressive positions. He'd shocked society by proposing to a solicitor's daughter he'd met while touring one of their schools, and Julian had given his blessing without hesitation. Young Eleanor, 19 and fierce as wildfire, had declared her intention to study medicine at Edinburgh, one of the first women admitted to their program. She'd inherited Margot's determination and Julian's stubbornness, a combination that made her nearly unstoppable when she set her mind to something. Perfect, the artist declared, stepping back. Though I'm not certain any painting could truly capture what I see when I look at your family, Your Grace. There's a light that comes from within, from love and purpose intertwined. You've done beautifully, Margot assured him. She studied the portrait, seeing not just who they were now but the impossible journey that had brought them here. From a midnight library encounter to this, 3 extraordinary children, a legacy of charitable works that had touched thousands of lives, and a love that had only deepened with each passing year. The anniversary celebration that evening was intimate despite the grandeur of Ravenscourt's ballroom. Close friends, family, the key supporters of their foundation, the teachers from their schools. Mrs. Dawes, now 87 and silver-haired but still sharp as ever, held the place of honor beside Margot's chair. 25 years, the old housekeeper marveled, dabbing at her eyes. I remember that morning like yesterday. You in your brown dress, Lady Vivian spitting fury, and His Grace riding up like an avenging angel. An avenging angel who'd barely slept and was terrified he'd arrived too late, Julian corrected with a smile, overhearing. He'd aged gracefully, his dark hair now threaded with silver, lines at the corners of his eyes from years of laughter. I'd never been so frightened in my life as I was that morning. Yet you came, Margot said softly, taking his hand. That's what mattered. Later, as the celebration wound down, Julian pulled her aside. Walk with me. There's somewhere I want to take you. They slipped away from their guests, moving through Ravenscourt's corridors hand in hand like the young couple they'd once been. But instead of heading to the gardens or the library, Julian led her to the stables where 2 horses stood saddled and waiting. Julian, what are you planning? Trust me, he said, his grey eyes gleaming with mischief. As you did 25 years ago. They rode through the gathering dusk, leaving Ravenscourt's manicured grounds for the open countryside. Margot realized where they were heading only when the familiar silhouette of Ashford Hall appeared on the horizon. Julian. I bought it, he said simply. 3 months ago. Lady Vivian's creditors were selling to settle debts, and I made certain I was the highest bidder. Margot stared at the manor where she'd spent 15 years as a shadow. It looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier, its grandeur faded by time and neglect. Why? Because I wanted you to see it as you are now, not as the powerless girl who once lived here, but as the woman who transcended every limitation it tried to place on her. He dismounted and helped her down. And because I have plans for it. He led her not to the main house but to the rose garden. Her rose garden. To her amazement, it had been recently tended, the beds weeded, the arbor repaired. I've been having gardeners work here for weeks, Julian explained. I wanted it perfect for today. This is where I fell completely, irreversibly in love with you, Margot. Where you told me about these damask roses that survived against all odds. He turned to face her fully. I'm converting Ashford Hall into a school. The flagship of the Ravenscourt Foundation. Girls from difficult circumstances will live and learn here, will tend these roses, will discover their own worth in the same garden where I discovered mine. Margot pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming freely. The Margot Ashworth School for Girls, he continued. Named for the woman you were before you became my Duchess. So those girls know that transformation is possible, that their current circumstances don't define their future. Julian. I'm not finished. He pulled a letter from his coat. This arrived last week. From Lady Vivian. She's living quietly in Bath now with Arabella. Her fortune is gone, her health failing. She wrote to ask, quite humbly, if you might visit before she dies. Margot took the letter with trembling fingers, scanning the careful script so different from Lady Vivian's once imperious hand. Your Grace, I have no right to ask anything of you. But I am an old woman facing my mortality, and I find I cannot die with certain words unspoken. You deserved better than I gave you. Your mother was not the seductress I painted her as, she was a good woman who loved unwisely but well. And you were an innocent child who deserved kindness rather than cruelty. I cannot undo the past, but I can offer this truth and a request for forgiveness I likely don't deserve. Whatever you decide, know that watching what you've built from nothing but strength and grace has been the greatest rebuke to my failures I could imagine. You became everything I tried to convince you that you weren't. Vivian Hartley. Will you go? Julian asked gently. Margot folded the letter carefully. Yes. Not because she deserves forgiveness, forgiveness isn't about deserving. I'll go because I've learned that carrying bitterness is exhausting, and I'd rather spend my energy on love and purpose than on old wounds. They stood together in the rose garden as twilight deepened to night, surrounded by flowers that had witnessed the beginning of their love story. Above them, stars emerged one by one, ancient light traveling vast distances to reach them. Do you ever think about how unlikely this all was? Margot wondered aloud. That you wandered into a midnight library. That Mrs. Dawes was brave enough to take my letter. That you arrived in time. Every day, Julian replied. And every day, I'm grateful for each impossible coincidence that brought us here. He pulled her close. Though I'm not sure they were coincidences. Perhaps the universe simply recognized what I saw in that library, that you were always meant for extraordinary things. We built them together, Margot corrected. The schools, the foundation, our children. None of it would exist if you hadn't seen me when everyone else looked past me. And none of it would matter if you hadn't been exactly who you are, someone who took being seen and used it to ensure others were seen as well. They rode back to Ravenscourt as the moon rose, silver light spilling across the parkland. Inside, their children waited, their friends and supporters, Mrs. Dawes dozing by the fire, the portrait in the gallery capturing this moment in their family's history. Margot stood in the doorway of the ballroom, watching Catherine laugh with her husband, Charles deep in political discussion with fellow reformers, Eleanor sketching anatomical drawings in her ever-present notebook. Three extraordinary humans who had grown up knowing their worth, knowing their voices mattered, never doubting they deserved happiness and respect. The legacy she and Julian had built extended far beyond this room. Thousands of girls had passed through their schools. Hundreds had found employment, education, futures they'd never have had otherwise. Legal reforms had been enacted. Social attitudes slowly shifted. The work would continue long after she and Julian were gone, carried forward by their children and the children of the girls they'd helped. No regrets? Julian asked, coming to stand beside her. Margot thought of the frightened girl in the brown dress, thought of Lady Vivian's cruelty and the convent that almost claimed her, thought of 15 years lived in shadows. Then she looked at the life she'd built, not despite those painful years, but in some strange way because of them. Only that I wasted so much time believing what others said about my worth, she replied. But I suppose I needed that journey to understand what I understand now. Which is? She smiled, taking his hand. That true worth was never about inheritance or bloodlines or social position. It was always about recognizing the treasure others overlooked, in ourselves, in each other, in every person society tries to render invisible. You recognized it in me. I learned to recognize it in myself. And together, we've spent 25 years helping others recognize it too. That, Julian murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple, is exactly why I fell in love with you in a midnight library and have never stopped falling since. They rejoined their celebration, two souls who had found each other across impossible odds and had chosen every day since to keep finding each other. The invisible girl had become unforgettable. The Duke who could have anyone had chosen the one person everyone said he shouldn't. And from that choice, they had built something that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of love, purpose, and the revolutionary idea that every person, regardless of birth or circumstance, possessed inherent worth waiting to be recognized and honored. The portrait in the gallery would hang there for generations, telling their story to descendants yet unborn. But the real legacy lived in every girl who walked through the doors of their schools, in every life transformed, in every person who learned that they mattered. 25 years ago, Julian had ridden to Ashford Hall and changed everything. But the true miracle wasn't the dramatic rescue or the impossible marriage. It was what they had built together afterward, a life of meaning, a love that deepened rather than faded, and the unwavering belief that being seen was every person's birthright, not a privilege granted by others. The bastard niece had become a duchess. But more importantly, she had become herself, fully, powerfully, unapologetically. And that transformation had lit the way for thousands more. In the end, the greatest revenge against those who tried to make you invisible is not to destroy them, it's to become so brilliantly, undeniably visible that the whole world stops to watch your light. Margot didn't just escape the shadows. She set them on fire. Thank you for journeying with us through Margot and Julian's unforgettable love story, from midnight library encounters to dramatic rescues, from invisibility to legacy. If this tale of transformation, redemption, and the power of being truly seen touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite moment? Which scene made you cry? Share this story with someone who needs to remember their worth. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances and happily ever afters, and subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking historical romances that prove love can conquer even the cruelest circumstances. Your support helps us continue creating these emotional journeys, and we're so grateful you're here with us. Until our next story, remember, you are worthy of being seen. Two Heart Sparkles. If Margot's transformation from invisible to unforgettable gave you all the feels, don't let this be where our story ends. Rose. Hit that subscribe button right now because we're just getting started with tales of forbidden love, dramatic rescues, and happily ever afters that'll have you ugly crying into your pillow at 3 a.m. Gemstone coming next week, a governess with a secret past, a brooding Scottish laird with a wounded heart, and a castle hiding more than just ghosts. Backhand index pointing right, smash that like button if you believe nobody deserves their Duke moment. Speech balloon, drop a comment telling us, would you have forgiven Lady Vivian? We're dying to know. Bell turn on notifications so you never miss when we drop the next swoon-worthy romance. Because here's the truth, beautiful soul, you're not here by accident. You found this story because you believe in love that fights back, in second chances, in the power of being seen. And we've got 50+ more stories just like this waiting for you. Your next emotional roller coaster is one click away. Don't just visit, become part of our romance-loving family. Subscribe now and let's keep falling in love with impossible stories together. Sparkles, she was told she was nothing. She became everything. Your story isn't over either.